Welcome to another episode of the Dentology Podcast, where we discuss the business of dentistry. In this podcast series, we'll be discussing all the non-clinical aspects of dentistry, from goodwill values, finance, marketing, how to buy and sell a dental practice, mindset, through to where you can invest your money in team management issues. My name is Andy Acton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Strevens. Let's jump straight into it.
That was really nice and interesting to do a slightly different podcast episode with Laura Hannon, General Manager of the BDA Benevolent Fund this time.
Yeah, I found it fascinating actually. I learned so much about the BDA Benevolent Fund. I mean, the ages and requirements and what they provide. It was, for anyone listening, they should definitely go to their website and learn more about them, because I think we have a misinterpretation of them.
Yeah, and digging into their financial and wellbeing survey. I mean, 485 respondents, that's a pretty decent sample to give an insight as to how dentists have been affected through their COVID dental school experience.
Yeah, so I thought it was excellent, really good, worthwhile.
Some of those stats are quite remarkable. I bet the listeners will take a lot from that episode.
Definitely.
So welcome to our latest episode of Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. And today we are very fortunate. We're joined by Laura Hannon, who's the General Manager of the BDA Benevolent Fund. It's a charity organisation established in 1883.
Flipping, hey,
would you believe?
That's a long time.
And they've been supporting dentists, students and their families living in the UK. And today we're talking about a recent survey on the financial and wellbeing of UK dental students, which was conducted in late 2021. Welcome, Laura. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you for having me. It's nice.
Oh, pleasure.
No, not at all.
Nice to be
not
here.
At all. No, we're excited to find out more about this survey. So, could you perhaps just give us a bit of backstory on this survey, and if it's a new initiative by the BDA Benevolent Fund, and why it was you wanted to understand more about dental students?
Yeah. So, what was the sort of thinking behind it, really? Yeah.
The thinking was that in any given year, we probably support about 10-20% of our applicants are students. But obviously, beginning of lockdown and COVID, that number has massively increased. And in throughout 2021, 55% of our applicants were students. So we knew there was a kind of trend that we were seeing more applications. And I did some research about just general wellbeing and the financial pressures that students might face, and there wasn't anything out there. So I put a proposal to the board and said, I think this is something that I think we should do. And they agreed. So that was great. We worked with a research company, went out to Tender, found a research company, and we involved the dental profession as part of the survey. So we spoke to some of our previous applicants, spoke to universities, because we felt that we were kind of that independent organisation that was in the middle to be able to learn about it. And then equally, that would have a knock-on effect of those students learning about us and what we do, and kind of increase awareness in that way. So that was the main reason behind it.
Wow.
And it's been fascinating to get them.
I'll tell you something I've learned already, which I'm quite amazed at. I had never in my head, I'd always thought BDA Benevolent Fund was for like older dentists, retired dentists. And I hadn't really thought about it for students. That you were saying you get applications. Did you say you normally get 10 or something? Yeah.
So it's about 10%. So we probably support we have about 100, 150 applications a year. That may be the same person applying more than once, because people do come back, or over time they may apply in different years. So kind of 50 to 70 people, and then maybe double the number of applications. The average age of the person applying now is about 31. So that is...
Wow.
It is massively brought down because of the prevalence of students applying. But that is, still support dentists, but not necessarily those kind of retired people, because by and large...
Has that changed, Laura? Has it sort of got younger as time's gone on? Is that a record that you guys keep? Can I say, in my head... Yeah, I was always thinking, we used to work for a bank years and years ago. We were laughing about it this morning. There's a terrible picture of us giving a cheque to the BDA Benevolent Fund from two ladies outside our head office, and we just looked totally different. But in my head, I'd always thought it was for older guys in their late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, something like that.
We're actually doing some research at the moment, and we're working with some volunteers who are going to look into our history for us, because, as you said, will be 140 next year. So I would like to do a project on that and find out about some of those circumstances and the cases. So from the very early days, it was kind of widows and children, orphans of dentists, because they weren't provided for, there wasn't the welfare state. And I think there was a period of time where mostly we supported people who were involved with the GDC or issues to kind of sickness, the dentist and their families. So we support the partners and widows of dentists. But now, as I said, the lot younger applicants, people in work, young associates, and that transition period between maybe you've been off sick or and you need to get back into work. And obviously dentistry is quite an expensive profession. It's not like you and I, we just start a job and that's kind of it. There's a lot of fees involved in doing that. So we support people with those costs, indemnity or registration fee, travel to work kind of thing before they start earning. But now, the majority of our applications this year and last year were from students.
It's good work. It's good work. And I see that the survey was well responded as well. There were 485 respondents to it, which in terms of a sample is decent. And I was surprised to see that 40% of those that responded had considered dropping out due to money worries and well-being concerns. I don't know if you know the answer to this, because I don't know how many years you've done this survey, but do you think their COVID experience would have influenced that as a percentage in previous years? Have you done this survey in previous years?
No, this is the first ever time I've done the survey, which is fascinating. Right. I am hoping that we will at least replicate it maybe this year or potentially next year to kind of get that sort of state of the nation from students, and then we can have more evidence and information about how things are changing. Obviously, we were doing it in a COVID year, so it's not like a baseline sample of the reality of dental students from a research point of view.
And that's what I was wondering. I was wondering whether the 40% is a distortedly high figure because of their COVID experience, and if you continue to do it in years to come, we'd see that number
drop off,
falling.
Yeah, that would be interesting to learn.
You started at a peak.
Yeah, definitely. I think would be nice if we could do that. We've obviously spent all the time and energy in putting the survey together, so I don't think it'd be hard to replicate. And actually, it's more the work getting people to fill it in. So engaging with the universities and getting them to spread it around for us is part of the challenge. But equally, that allows us to have those conversations with the university and make them known about what we do and how we help and what we can support them, because it doesn't replicate the support from universities. It's kind of complementary to that. So to go back to your question, has COVID made things worse? I would say yes. I think there's the financial side and the wellbeing side was the two main themes of our survey. So in terms of the wellbeing, people were more isolated. Either they were at university and on their own, maybe their course mates have gone home. Because obviously dentistry is longer than the average degree, and maybe people wanted to be at home. And we can't really forget that there are issues with bereavement that people were encountering. Maybe they've lost some of their family members whilst they were doing this, and still doing the academic and to an extent the clinical side, at least earlier on. And then the financial side, some universities have extended their courses. Scottish universities by a whole year, and some of the others just by a few months. But if you're doing quite a long course anyway, and then you think that you're nearly finished, and now you've got a whole other year to go, worries about how you're going to fund that, and then how kind of sustain that energy that you've put in order to do your course. And those people that were thought, particularly, so I've just spoken to international students this morning, I've got a few more calls this afternoon. It's a very expensive course to do for 5 years. And if you think that, okay, fine, your family will put that money aside for you for 5 years, and now that's 6, it's a lot of money to be able to support someone. And they would have been working now, and now they're not. And so they've kind of lost that 1 year of income that potentially they might not ever get back. So it has exacerbated things, from both parts of kind of finance and the wellbeing side.
And I guess that fits with that stat which was 74% of the students that were surveyed said they had concerns about money. And money can't buy happiness, but it sure as heck is a stress reliever, isn't it, if there's some money sloshing around. What help and support does the BDA Benevolent Fund provide? Because it's not just kind of handing out money, is it? I guess there's a kind of a support service as well.
Yeah, so every time someone applies, I speak with them. So it's very much a kind of bespoke service that we offer to make sure that we're supporting people with what they need. Although that does make it, I guess, confusing, because it's not like you just fill in a box and then someone sends you a nice check. But it does mean that what they're worried about, say the rent or the travel or is their concerns, is that something that we kind of match the funding to. Also, the form is designed in a way to allow people to articulate what their financial situation is, because primarily that's what we do. We grant funds, so we give money out for people. And so that opens up conversations for me to have about what they're spending the money on, not in a judgment way. And obviously, it's an open conversation, and sometimes it will be, you're spending higher than average on this, but sometimes it's, again, you've said that you're living off £20 a week. That's probably not realistic. And have I missed something? And we adjust the figures so that they make sense and they're kind of equal. So I have a conversation with everybody. They talk about what the issues are, and then that goes through to the trustees. It's all electronic based. It's an anonymous application form from the trustees' point of view, and they make the decision based on what the student has written versus the kind of summary of their finances. So it is a bespoke situation. It can be kind of labour intensive, but equally we're helping people with what they feel that they need. And I can signpost them to other support to make sure they're speaking to universities and tell them about the other things that we offer. So we have a partnership with the company that offers wellbeing support. There's an app you can download. They do webinars, and there's a helpline. So if you've got concerns about your mental health, particularly if you want access to counselling, that's all available as well. So
I suppose the good thing on that is even if they've reached out to you and they haven't been successful with getting any support financially, then you can at least signpost them to somewhere where if they're emotionally or their well-being is an issue or something, you're not just purely that, right, well, no, we can't give you any money, so tough.
No, and in any case,
hey, we'll give you something else.
If we say no to someone because we're not going to give them some money, it's because they've got money. So I don't feel like upset by they don't meet our criteria because they're not considered to be in financial need. And that is, can they manage over the next 3 months with either their income or their savings? So that's not to say that people can't come back, and people do apply year after year or within the year or whatever, because it's based on those current situations. So we do help them. But if they've got money, then we don't help them, and that's not necessarily a problem for either of us, is it really? Because they can manage.
No, I tell you, it would be good, Laura, because could you send over to me those links of those resources, and I'll put those in the episode notes.
Yeah.
So that if there's anybody listening to this that wanted to help, they could click on it and get access to that, which would be helpful.
Yes,
I'm
and also
multiple applications. That's quite interesting, isn't it? It's quite an interesting one, really. And you sometimes get, not obviously mention anybody, but I presume you get some where you sort of go, no, come on, be serious. Look at what you're spending, and almost become like their mum, or in a way. Seriously, you've come to us.
Well, I mean, don't they say that people would prefer to walk naked than to have conversations with money? So obviously, it's not.
It's true.
An intrusive process, but obviously I'm an independent person. I speak to them on the phone. I'm not there to say cut out your Waitrose spending habit or whatever. Like, it's just allows us to have a kind of benchmark kind of understanding of the reality. And some people, yes, are a bit on their extravagant lifestyle. We don't put dentists back in the situations if they were working. We prioritise. So if they need support, say with their rent or their mortgage, we will pay that at cost for 3 months. And we're not going to be like, well, because you live in this house or that house, because we want to make people prioritise their essentials. So make sure they're staying in the home, that they're fed, and pay the bills. When it comes to those discretionary things, then we will have a conversation. If someone's spending £1,000 a month on food, that's fine. That's up to them. If they want to, they can do that. We just aren't going to pay for that. And we would support them to an appropriate level. There's an organisation called the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and they're a poverty activism charity, and they do this thing called a minimum income calculator. So you can look at what the individual is. So if they've got a family of 2 school-aged children, then that will say this is roughly what society suggests is enough for you to live off. And we use that to kind of understand for some of those discretionary areas of funding. So if it's, we'll pay your electricity bill if that's what you're worried about, at what that bill is. But if other things are slightly more extravagant, then we'll say we'll pay up to this level. And maybe now's the time to understand why you might have got into this situation. Often it's no fault of their own. If you're ill mentally or physically and you can't work, then that's just one of those things that's unpredictable. Hopefully people, particularly dentists, will have steps to manage that. So maybe they've got income protection insurance, or they've got savings. But eventually some of those things will run out, or there'll be gaps in time when they can't manage. But part of what we do is that financial planning, in essence, and allow people to understand why they've got in this situation. Which
are great life skills, aren't they? That's a fabulous life skill.
It must be a tricky line, really, in a way, because you're asking intrusive questions, but also you've got to be mindful of the circumstance they're in. So you almost have to be a bit like a financial counsellor, don't you, to a certain degree, of because you can't sort of like bash, question 1, question 2, question 3. No, I'm not interested. Question 4. You must. It must imagine. I don't know. Does it become quite intense and quite emotional at times for the guys on the other end, or maybe for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the main part, student applications are quite straightforward. In essence, they're not properly funded, particularly towards their final year. It's quite difficult for me because all the countries are different, so the finance isn't the same. Plus also student finance is based on your parents' income, even though you're a grown adult. And the NHS bursary doesn't necessarily cover people's circumstances for the main part. If you're from maybe a low income background, if you're a second degree student, if you've got care responsibilities, those are all the types of people that come to us more than the average person maybe that's put some money aside or has lived with their family. And in terms of, the dentists, there's an issue with dentistry sometimes when people are quite proud, they're competitive, maybe they're quite private, and so it is a step for them to even apply in the first place. Maybe they didn't realise when they applied that they have to have a conversation with me, but we don't feel as an organisation that we could just get a bit of paper and put yes or no on it and then send a cheque. That's not who we are. That's not what we want to do.
Yes, very bespoke.
Allows us to have those conversations and signpost or explore and give other options for them and make sure that they're well in whatever sense that is.
I also saw in the report that 56% of students worked whilst alongside their studies, and obviously we know how intense the clinical focus is at dental school, and whilst there is obviously it supports you financially working, there's obviously another dimension to it, which is the building out interpersonal skills and life skills. So you don't want people to have to work and neglect their studies because they can't afford to do the course and they need to kind of make their financial ends meet. But there is merit, I think, in people if they're able to work and able to cope with that, because then when they qualify from dental school, they've not just got pure clinical skills. There's a broader skill set in there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it doesn't specifically say, because I don't think we broke down the evidence to that level of detail, although I could check, but majority of them work in early years, so the first, second and third year when the clinical work isn't so tough. I have a lot of conversations with people in their fourth and fifth year when the funding's different and their savings have gone or circumstances have changed, and that's when they're having those real dilemmas, which relates to thinking about quitting. Of, I know this is what my income is, so for say if you're at Queen's University in Belfast, your NHS bursary always covers your fees, which is great, and you get a student loan of £1,850 a year. Like that, how are people going to survive off that?
Yeah,
and so
there
is a real conversation with people going, well, I need to do this job in order to pay my rent, but then I just don't know when I'm going to be able to do that because I'm doing full-time clinical work. And we are starting to see the petrol costs and inflation having a greater impact, because people, whereas they would have gone to work part-time bar work, they're doing, COVID vaccinators or whatever, and now they can't necessarily afford to travel to get that money. So this is real kind of conversation of like, well, I want to work to get those skills, to meet other people, to broaden my horizons. Also, I need it to pay the rent, but then it's costing me too much to get there, or I don't really have the time. And that's generally when we would sort of step in and offer those funds towards living costs, so that people don't have to stress about it so much.
And in the report, I mean, there's obviously a direct link between the money side of life and well-being. And recently we spoke to Margaret Kaja, who's she's like Mind Ninja online. And we were talking to her about well-being and mindfulness. And in the report, it showed that there were about 3/4 of students say they needed well-being support, but only 1/3 of them got support. Why do you think that is? Is there still a stigma around asking for help around well-being?
I mean, yeah, there is, isn't there? I mean, I don't think everyone would say that society is so au fait with mental illness that everyone would just tell everyone all their problems all the time. There's definitely still an issue. And I think it's medical professions have that kind of added worry of they feel that they should be fine, or they should be able to manage it properly, or maybe they're worried that they actually might know the person that they go to speak to, or someone will get out and then there'll be implications on their career because
that's
an added pressure though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
You're
or
a bit
maybe
flaky at uni. What are you going to be like when you're out there? That's true. I suppose you haven't thought about that really. The stigma that goes with it.
And I think sometimes it's also about the wording, not really understanding how you feel and how you would translate that into needing support. So maybe you just feel a bit run down or a bit sad for a couple of days, but then you don't necessarily equate that to having a mental health problem or having not great wellness, whatever the verb for that is. But understanding those kind of patterns of your own behaviour and doing those kind of self-care tips, sleeping well, eating well, speaking to people, kind of socialising, balancing that course life, work life with your kind of personal life and your hobbies and interests, and understanding those things, and then how that would relate to, is it a long-term unsustainable solution? So often dentists, we find, don't really want to talk about it because they're in a unique situation where they're working with a lot of people, but maybe not all of those people are what they would consider to be their peers, and so they don't want to sort of confess that they're having issues either with their well-being or their money. And so we really would recommend like kind of talking
yeah, it's really multidimensional, isn't it, in terms of that the impact.
It's sort of layer upon layer, isn't it, really? And also, I suppose, as you were saying, Laura, depending on where you are in your study, depends on where your emotions are at that point in time, and especially during the COVID thing, I mean, it's an interesting one. Wonder when the students in the middle of lockdown were ever wondering, because none of us knew what was going to happen, might they actually ever qualify? I don't know, but at that time when we locked down, it was all a bit of a shock for us all, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I must admit, it was an eye opener in the report that 55% of the respondents were impacted by depression, which is that's a massive number, and it's well known that in dentistry at the moment there's a recruitment crisis. Trying to find associates. There's lots of nurses who are leaving the profession, and do you think that kind of feeding towards depression potentially impacts on people choosing dentistry as a career going forward? I
mean, I would love to be able to answer that question, but it's not entirely sure.
That's not an easy question.
Yeah. Answers on a postcard, please.
I think you made me think I'm more important than I am. How would I answer that question? Do future dentists listen to this podcast, read our surveys, and then understand that maybe it's going to be tougher than they think? I don't know. Is there a kind of correlation between dentist families, so people going to university that are related to someone already? I don't know, and how they would learn about it. But equally, we have to appreciate that it is a well-established profession. People do have good careers through it. The people that I work with, particularly our board, are all people that have really enjoyed working in dentistry. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think students nowadays and the younger generation, or as generations move through society, they are more open and acknowledging and disclosing that. I think maybe if you did this survey and compared it generation by generation, hopefully people are better at speaking out about what the realities are. I understand it anecdotally that people don't necessarily want to work in the way that they always used to. We talk about how COVID has affected that and kind of flexible working, but people don't want to work full-time hours. They're not doing every hour that they used to before, because they appreciate the balance of what that life can give them by the enjoyment that they get out of working and speaking to patients and the clinical side and the achievement that you get, plus also the balance that you get from working, seeing your family and socializing and doing your hobbies or sport or whatever that is. I don't know is the answer.
It's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Like the whole world is now, there's very much more of a work from home culture and remote working. Well, you can't do that as a dentist, can you? You've got to be in the surgery. So maybe that is the balance where you've got we're here anecdotally, aren't we? A lot of the guys graduating don't want to work full time.
Yeah,
because they want to have a bit of time for themselves. Whereas you look at lots of office workers, they're allowed to work remotely, work from home, come in the office, whereas a dentist can't do that. And I think it's I don't think, unless you actually either know a dentist or are involved in it, you as a non-dental punter, you don't realise how intense being a dentist is, really. I think it's almost seen as like, well, you rock up, you do a bit of filling and maybe a bit of tooth whitening, I'll straighten your teeth, I'll earn £150,000 because the Daily Mail says that, what's that, why? And I have the life of Riley. I don't think they really understand it unless you understand dentistry.
Well, yeah, and then if you think about it, not everybody likes going to the dentist, do they?
No.
I mean, I did not enjoy it when I was younger. They are a source of discomfort, let's say. If you've got something that needs to be doing. Obviously, if you're happy and healthy and that's fine, then you probably have a great relationship with dentists. So it is a profession where people are having to see but really don't want to be there, and having to manage and take on their stress and anxiety and supporting them through that. So we can't take that away from them as well. Yeah,
I was encouraged to see in the report that students were saying they'd like financial and wellbeing management integrated into their studies, which we agree with, and definitely. Also with some kind of basic business skills. But how the heck does it get fitted in? Because everybody says the clinical program is so intense and so full, there's no space for it. But as we've been talking about today, these elements are so critical. If you get these understood early on, it really gives people great foundations for a career. But how does that get fitted into the program?
We have been speaking to universities, and we'd love to get a program out there, either as a formal part of their timetable or as a optional extra. I don't think actually money management skills are an overly complicated concept to learn. I think if you have, say, an hour webinar, lecture, conversation, maybe in the first term, it just sows those seeds and helps you manage your money then. And then potentially again towards the ends, when you're learning more about the realities of self-employment or that transition issue between becoming a student. So final year students are quite unique in that the funding's different, and then they graduate, they've got to pay the relocation costs, they've got to maybe work in a place that they wouldn't really have chosen to go to as far away from their family, and they've got to pay the registration fee, and they don't really get paid until the end of September. So it's a big chunk of time. They've got to manage quite a lot of outgoings. Are they aware of that when you sign up? No. Is it useful for us to speak about that? Absolutely, so that people can plan ahead and they can think. So, obviously we can support grant funding where there's a need for that, but equally I think knowledge is as important as anything else. And if someone said to you, just prepare for this because that's going to come up, you could put that that money aside and be therefore less anxious about it because you're in control of the reality of the situation. So if you had a summer job in your first year and go, that's my registration money for when I graduate or whatever, then I think that all helps. So absolutely, I think we would love to work with universities or run it independently, but we think integrating as part of the timetable will be getting access to the students early on and help them learn about us as a charity and help them learn about those good skills that they can keep throughout the rest of their career.
And aside from we talk quite heavily around the sort of financial support available from the BDA Benevolent Fund, are there other ways that you support the profession as well, and what's the best way for them to kind of get access to those services?
So our website is where all our information happens. So check that out. Everybody applies online. It's some pre-eligibility questions. So are you a dentist, student or a dependent? Are you in hardship? Do you live in the UK? Brings up the right form. We've got a lot of links on our student page about other access to support. So making sure that people have spoken to their universities, learning about student finance. They've got the UCAS budget calculator on there. We've got a budget calculator which is open access. People can do that. Or there's a link to find out where your nearest debt advice agency is. So if you want to have that more complicated conversation with people about debts, because we can't advise on that and we don't support people with debts, but we want people to make sure that they're able to get out of the situation that they're in. We've also got an amazing resource called wellbeing support for the dental team. That's linked on our website, and it's a standalone website called supportfordentalteams.org.uk. So we would love different practices to put that information on their own websites, on their intranets, hand it out. Induction days or whatever.
Dentist Citizens Advice Bureau.
Yeah.
It's like amazing.
Yeah, well, I did actually volunteer with Citizens Advice Bureau back in the day when I was in a previous life. So
right, okay.
That's kind of advice.
Well, it sounds like it, doesn't it? I just think that a number of people that when they look at places, they go to Citizen Advice, and it provides a very valuable service, but it's really hard to access at times, it would appear. You've got all this resource on your website that I wonder how many people know about it. It's that other thing, isn't it? How many people know to come to you to go, oh yeah, well.
In defence of Citizens Advice, they're funded locally, so there's loads of complicated reasons about, but there is, it depends on which branch you're at versus what kind of support you're getting, and also the majority staffed by volunteers, so that's quite a complicated business model, but equally an amazing resource because everybody can go and get support, and they'll do kind of a bespoke budget check. But obviously I get queries about supporting other members of the dental team. Our remit doesn't extend to hygienists, therapists, nurses. We don't yet have the resources to do that. We would love to expand.
We should put a link to them on our website.
Yeah, no, we should. Yeah, we'll definitely put a link in the notes to this episode of the podcast, just to make it as easy for people as possible to get access to it. But if you're happy, we'd also add a link and a short piece on our website to direct people, because it's one of those ones that, like you say, because of the sensitivity around it, some people might not ask. And because we kind of value and sell dental practices, there will be some people that will come to us because they see that as their way out of trouble. But actually, it might be that there's a conversation that could be had with somebody that might just in the short term.
All the young dentists that we have, I was just thinking, it's that great thing if you can signpost it to somewhere where there's somewhere they can go. The more signposts you can put out, the better it's got to be, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, that's why we created
I think you're doing great work.
Because me and other organisations, so the Dentist Health Support Trust, we work with Public Health England, and we just found that we were always telling people what was out there, where they could go to get support. And as much as that's nice for me to have that knowledge, it's better if it's just open and available to everybody. So we work together as a kind of collaborative independent group to put this document together. And it starts off with sort of self-care tips and tricks and understanding about kind of sleep or stress. And then it bookmarks and signposts to other organisations related to your problem. So if you've got an issue with bereavement or suicidal thoughts or cultural specific organisations you want to access, then, and it's key coded related to what part of the profession you're in. So if you're a dentist or a student or a dental care professional, then it's got the link in that. And I think that, if someone comes to you because they're struggling, you feel that you want to do something, but maybe you don't necessarily have all the expertise to be able to answer their problem. the most part, people just want you to listen. But if you can listen, and then also you can say, here's a guide, or you could just like subtly leaving it lying around in your practice or whatever, and then it allows people to be empowered and to find the support that they need themselves, and without having to go through those kind of third parties like us and other organisations, because better that we could do to get people to support themselves earlier on, the easier it is later on. Later, if people come to us sometimes a bit too late, obviously we'll speak to everybody when they apply and deal with the current situation, but I think maybe they are embarrassed, or they think it's going to change, and maybe they're £5,000 overdrawn already. We can't pay their overdraft off, and it's not necessarily in their interest for that to happen, because if they're £5,000 overdrawn, we gave them 5,000. They still don't have any money. They just don't have that debt anymore. So the early people can kind of take control of their financial situation and realise the problem, the better it is for us all, I'd say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cheers,
Brilliant.
Laura. That's been fascinating.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
I think the report's good, but also just to find out more about the work you're doing.
Yeah,
I think it's really good. It's really good. So we'll definitely get those links in the episode. And I'll be interested to see if you do this survey again. It may be that we can perhaps get you back next year and see what the differences are and what's changed over the coming year.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to talk to you.
Lovely. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.